All right, first and foremost, we have a couple of pieces of business to discuss. First of all, Ed Silver, could you stand up, please?
Breakfast first.
No, stand up, Ed. Ed Silver is going to be getting an award. The JCRC is going to be giving him an award. Best Organizational Representative. It's going to be June 2nd. Is that correct, June 2nd?
Yeah.
It will be at the JCC. Starts what time?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. It would be, it's an $18 for cover for a kosher dessert. It would be nice for as many people who can make it to show up. For basically, not only is it honoring Ed, it's also honoring us as South Jersey Men's Club, as the organization that he represents. Other than that, you wanted to make an announcement?
We can talk, we can have business afterwards, or do it now?
We can do how many people are hungry right now? How many people like me got up this morning and didn't realize you didn't have breakfast till you got here? Because that's when your brain woke up. Okay, that's it. I'll tell you what, who, newest member? Newest member.
Right there, right here, today.
Hamotzi.
What doesn't know it? Forgot he's Italian.
Let's help him out. Amen. Okay. I'm not going to set you by table. It's one for all and all for one. Okay. We're going to start our meeting now. We'll have a short business meeting, and then we'll have our speaker. We're planning on another baseball outing, and I will turn this over to Richie Moskowitz to give us some details.
Hi, about a couple of years ago, we had a trip to the Camden River Sharks, and it was pretty successful. So we're going to try to do it again this year. We're thinking about August. I'm going to pass around a sheet. If you're interested, put it down. It could be a Sunday, it could be during the week. If you have a preference, put it down next to your name. The cost of the ticket would be $9 as a group, but they also have buffets. There's a buffet available. There's one barbecue buffet, which is $22. It's not kosher. There's also another buffet, which is $27. That includes a ticket. It's not kosher. If you're interested in that too, you can put down buffet yes, buffet no. And if you put your name down, we'll get it together. And we had a real good time this time. So that's Camden River Sharks, and it's a fun place to go. So I'm going to be passing that around. And there's also be another sign-up sheet for the JCRC meeting, which is Thursday, June 2nd. Again, it starts 7 o'clock in the evening, and the cover for that is $18. Thanks.
Okay, now a short report from our membership chairman.
First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. We have some, oh, thank you. Wow. We have some new potential members here today. Dave Schwartz, do you want to introduce? Did you bring somebody here?
Arnie Cotton's here from Centennial Mill.
All right, Arnie, where are you? Stand up, Arnie.
Can they see?
Hey, Arnie, we're going to embarrass you again. Say something about yourself.
I'm short.
I can give you $1.
Well, Mike stand next to you.
Live in Centennial Mill, retired college professor, and into what? Showbiz? Yeah. I get involved in Centennial Mill's activities and blah, blah, blah. Okay?
There you go.
Bob. Tim Pinsky.
Oh,
Another guy.
Tim?
Got to do song and dance also?
No, just a little something about yourself.
Just a dance. Oh, the lax was great. This is quite a spread. Thank you.
See you next week.
All right. See you next week. I'm a friend of Dave Schwartz.
Be a visit.
Hey, guys, no bother.
We have Herb back here. Hey, Herb.
Our
Newest member,
newest member,
number 101.
101.
Now 101, get somebody else to get.
All right.
No, I think the gentleman back there from,
From
Irving. It's Irving.
Irving.
Right,
I speak loud, you can hear me.
good.
My name is Irvin Orell, I'm a resident of Lionsgate. I want to thank you for inviting us here today.
You're quite welcome, and on behalf of the group, we'd like to thank Lionsgate for having us here. No.
My friend Ray
That's okay. My name is Ray Rosenholz. I live in Southern Medford. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, I have two guests today. I have my wife Sherry and my daughter Alyssa.
Very good.
New members?
Yeah, right.
Dave Wynn isn't here, so we don't have a sports report. Mike, would you like to say a few words? Mike, as you know, is very, very active in our support of Israel, and I'm sure he's going to have some very interesting thoughts on what's going on right now. As a matter of fact, he's going to be going from here down to DC for the APAC convention. So, Mike?
Thanks, Bob. I think that quite a few of you may have been shocked by the president's speech the other day. And I'm looking forward to see what the reaction will be like when he speaks today at the APAC conference. For those of you that aren't aware of it, most of the information that's public knowledge is just plain wrong. It's absolutely undocumented and can be contradicted with historical evidence and testimony, and even the spokesman from Israel will use the incorrect terminology because of the translations from Hebrew. For instance, one quick thing is this: a settlement. Nowhere on this planet would anyone rationally call a community of tens of thousands of people that's been in place for decades a settlement, excepting on the West Bank. And this is the reason for that is because of the Hebrew words for settlement and how they literally translate it. Plus, Israelis, where's Eli?
Yeah.
Israelis are hard-headed, aren't they?
It is that.
They look like us, they usually sound like us, but they don't really process and perceive things the same way, for whatever reason. Okay. The other thing is the Arab Spring, so to speak. The Arab Spring. That's the media wishful thinking. How could you tell what the Arab Spring is, or if in fact it's going to be positive, unless you even know who it is that we're backing? Indications are that we're going to be helping to put Islamic republics in place instead of Arab nationalist dictators. And yet you don't hear this anywhere. I'm fortunate that I've developed contacts with the Israeli Foreign Ministries and some other people who know what's going on. We have no idea for most of these countries in the Middle East who it is we're supporting. And for the most part, the ones that we're supporting want nothing more than the illumination of the free world. So it's everything that's Muslim, like it or not. And that is, if you want to believe what they teach in their schools and preach in their mosques and have in their Arabic speeches. Because in the English speeches, they want peace, reconciliation. But that's not what they tell their children. So the question is, to whom are Arab leaders lying? To us or to their own people? I wish I could give you a more positive briefing on this, but if you want to be realistic, it's not a very positive situation. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to turn the meeting over now to Dave Schwartz, who's going to introduce our speaker and tell us a little bit about our speaker.
I have a little introduction to read here, so if you bear with me. As millions of European Jews' lives were endangered by the rise of the Nazis in the 1930s, little was done by nations to offer Jews a safe haven. Harsh immigration laws enacted by countries such as the United States and Canada virtually slammed the door shut, and efforts to loosen the restrictions for refugee children were largely unsuccessful. Immigration to Palestine was severely limited by the British, who sought to mollify demands by Arabs not to allow Jews to enter. And countries such as Cuba, which had initially issued tourist visas to hundreds of Jews, reneged on their promises to admit them. Nevertheless, a small number of European Jewish children, mostly German, arrived in the United States during the period of 1934 to 1945, thanks to the help of numerous refugee organizations. Their circumstances were unique, since these children were under the care of American families while they still had parents living in Europe, many of whom would not escape the Holocaust. The number rescued is estimated to be more than 1,200. As we will learn in this presentation, our speaker has taken a personal interest in these events, since he is related by marriage to 3 German Jewish refugee children who arrived in the United States in 1940, before Germany shut the door to immigration and commenced mass deportation to ghettos and concentration camps. Learn how he pieced together the story from documents discovered in his mother-in-law's home, documents discovered in archives, and materials he found on the internet. During the presentation, the speaker will provide a historical perspective of immigration on a national and international level, and explain how genealogy plays an important role in the preservation of our ancestral roots. The speaker welcomes questions and participation from the audience. Alan Finkelstein is an insurance actuary whose career spans 34 years. Originally a native of suburban Detroit, Alan and his family moved to Cherry Hill in 1989. He is currently employed at Ace USA in Philadelphia and has been an active member of the South Jersey Men's Club since 1995. Welcome, Alan.
As was mentioned in the introduction, it was years ago, following the death of my mother-in-law, Frida Greenfield, that we discovered a number of documents and photos that led back to her days when she was a young girl in Germany, about the start of World War II. Now, Frida had come to the United States in 1940. She lived with a Jewish family in the Detroit area. Her 2 brothers also came with her. They were unaccompanied by their parents, who were still in Germany. And it wasn't until after the war that they had learned about the fate of their parents. Frida simply refused to talk at all about her life in Germany, and wouldn't even admit to being a German. Okay, David, next slide. Okay, this is an undated photo taken in the 1940s. I'm not quite sure the exact date. Frida, or Fritchen as she was originally named, with her older brother David standing in the back and younger brother Harold in the front. Some of the things that we knew before I started my research: they were born in a town called Wuppertal, Elberfeld. Their parents' names were Adele and Muttel Schwartz. We know approximately when they left Germany. They started to make their plans in December 1939, and then left Germany for Italy in early 1940. We also knew that the mother, Adele, could have accompanied the children on the trip to the United States, but did not want to leave her husband behind. He did not have a passport, so after dropping off the children in Italy, she went back to Germany in the hopes of securing a passport for her husband. And at some point thereafter, they were deported to a ghetto. We did not know that until I did my research. And we know that at some point in time, we don't know the exact date, they died in the Holocaust. Okay, next slide. This map is of, will give you some idea of where Wuppertal is located. Look for the red star over to the left, right there. To the west of Germany, going from the bottom to the top, is France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And over there, just below, is Switzerland. And to the east, you have countries like Austria, the Czech Republic, and Poland. Two other places I want to point out, if I can do this correctly. Up there in the north is Hamburg, which is a port city from which a lot of ships sailed to the United States. And to the south, I believe somewhere in this region, is Stuttgart, which was the location of the American consulate, which is where passports and immigration visas were issued to people who wanted to travel to the United States. Next slide. This is a comparison of Wuppertal back in the early 19th century over here, and here are some modern photos to the right. That elevated train is known as the Schwebebahn. It was built in the early 1900s and still exists today. And it's one of the things that Wuppertal is famous for. Wuppertal also has some interesting history. The first Jews arrived in Wuppertal sometime in the late 1600s. The city is very industrialized. It manufactured textiles, metallurgicals, chemicals, medicine, electricity, rubber, vehicles, and printing equipment. One of the most famous painkillers, Bayer aspirin, was invented in Wuppertal. The city is actually a conglomeration of several cities. Wuppertal is really more of a county. It consists of Barmen, Elberfeld, Vohwinkel, Ronsdorf, Kronenburg, Langerfeld, and Bevenberg. Eventually, the name Wuppertal-Elberfeld was chosen. During World War II, most of the city was destroyed by Allied bombers. Thousands of people died. Before the war, there were approximately 3,000 Jews living in Wuppertal. Okay, next slide. All right, now I have a trivia question. What is genealogy? Okay, next slide. Is it the study of families and the tracing of their lineages and history, or is it the study of genies that grant 3 wishes if you release them from their bottles? The answer is it's the study of the families and the tracing of their history. Okay, next slide. I want to first have a little disclaimer. I'm not really an expert in genealogy. I consider myself to be somewhat of a novice. Expert genealogists are hard to identify because they wear very clever disguises. Next slide. Such as the gentleman shown on the left, who cleverly disguised himself as an FBI agent. He was really an engineer. That's my father, Stanley Finkelstein. He was originally an aerospace engineer. He worked on Project Mercury, and he worked on the development of missiles for the U.S. Army. And after layoffs in the early 70s in the defense and space programs, he went to work for Ford Motor Company and was there for about 30 years as an automotive engineer. One of the fruits of the genealogical research that my father did is shown on the right. He discovered or located the grave of his grandfather, Shmuel Bar Aharonzev, as you can see in the lettering on the stone that is closest to you. Okay, next slide. My father has impressive credentials. He's a past president of the Michigan Jewish Genealogical Society, and he's attended many Jewish genealogical meetings. He's traced the family trees for both of his parents, Harry Finkelstein and Molly Gutman. and is currently researching his wife's and his son-in-law's family roots, and I understand that he's been able to trace them back to the early 1800s. Currently, he resides in Temecula, California, where he teaches an adult class on genealogy. He's written numerous articles, including one about the Schwartz children called The Story of Three Immigrant Children. And about a decade ago, he persuaded an organization called the Heritage Foundation for Preservation of Jewish Cemeteries to provide funds to restore the cemetery in Bardiov, Czech Republic, which is where his mother was originally from. Next slide. This will give you an idea of what it looked like before and after the restoration. My father actually went into the cemetery. He had to use a ladder to get over the wall because it was padlocked and nobody had taken care of it in more than 50 years. But with the help of this organization, they cleaned out all the foliage. They put the stones back together, put them upright in their original resting places, and then photographed and cataloged them. So the information is now out on the internet for people who are doing genealogical research. And I should also mention that next year marks the 70th anniversary of the deportation of the Jews from Bardiov to concentration camps, and they are planning a reunion, which my father will be attending. Okay, next slide. These are some key terms I want you to keep in mind. The first two contrast alien with citizen. Alien resident born in or belonging to another country who has not acquired citizenship by naturalization. And a citizen is a native or naturalized member of a state or nation who owes allegiance to the government. The reason why I highlight these is we're going to look at Ship's Manifest, which is a list of names of people who were on ships that came to the U.S. There were separate pages for people who were aliens versus U.S. citizens. Two additional terms. To emigrate means to leave a country or region to settle in another, while immigrate means to come to a country of which one is not a native, usually for permanent residence. And the last definition to keep in mind, very important, is a refugee is a person who flees for refuge or safety, especially to a foreign country, as in time of political upheaval, war, etc., because there was no guarantee that a person who was a refugee coming to another country would be allowed to stay. Normally it would be expected when the hostilities were over that they would be going back home. Next slide. Okay, can you name a member of South Jersey Men's Club who is a first-generation immigrant to the United States, and what was his original name? Any guesses?
I know it's Dave Wynn, but I don't remember his original name.
Next slide. Correct. This is from a 2005 softball game. He took his one-time at-bat that season to keep his perfect attendance intact. Dave was born in Vienna, Austria in 1933. He fled the country around 1938 or 39. He doesn't recall the exact date. He went with his parents after the Nazis annexed Austria, an event better known as the Anschluss. He lived in England until after the war, and in December 1948, he boarded a ship called the SS New Amsterdam, which sailed from Southampton, England, to Hoboken, New Jersey. Next slide. And the answer to the second part of the question, his name originally was Erwin Sass. David was his Hebrew name, and he got the win from Erwin. Just above the arrow, where I highlight his name, are the names of his parents, Chaim and Francesca. And in the upper right-hand corner, you'll probably note it says alien immigrant passengers. This was from that ship, the SS New Amsterdam. Okay, next slide. Okay, do you know where your ancestors came from? It is estimated that at least 100 million Americans are descended from immigrants who arrived at Ellis Island. I would venture to say that unless anybody here is descended directly from Native Americans that greeted the colonists at Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, we're all descended from immigrants that came from other countries or continents, I would guess that most of us can trace back our lineage to Europe. Next. Okay, for immigrants who came to the United States, probably one of the most vivid symbols, if they came through New York Harbor, which is where most of the immigrants arrived, is seeing the Statue of Liberty. And Emma Lazarus was a very famous immigrant who wrote a poem called The New Colossus, which is, you can see some of the words up on the slide. This is now mounted somewhere on the base of the Statue of Liberty. Okay, next slide. From the period of about 1855 to 1954, these were the two major places where immigrants were processed as they arrived in New York Harbor. The one on the left, called Castle Clinton, or Castle Garden, the name has changed, was originally a fort. It was actually on a little island that was attached to the mainland by a bridge, but over the passage of time, landfill was used to fill it in and make it part of the mainland. That's in the southern tip of Manhattan in Battery Park. Today, it is like a little mini museum that has photos and exhibits. You walk around the inside and you can see some of the history of the people who arrived there. And it's also where you would purchase tickets if you're taking the ferries to the Statue of Liberty or Ellis Island. At one time, there was more to that structure. There was like a wooden structure above it, where it was a concert hall and I think an aquarium. Sometime around the 1940s, this thing was practically in ruins, and it was saved from the wrecking ball with the help of Eleanor Roosevelt and some historical preservation organizations. Ellis Island opened in 1892. It was originally nothing more than some mud in the water, but over time landfill was used to build up that island. The original structure was made of wood, and in 1896 it caught on fire, was totally destroyed, and it had to be rebuilt, and the decision was made to use stone and mortar and bricks to make it more permanent. During World War II, it was used temporarily as an internment for prisoners of war. After the war, it was reopened to process immigrants, and then the decision was made in 1954 to close it forever. In 1990, after having been restored, it was reopened as a museum. Okay, next slide. Okay, now I'm going to talk about events that significantly impacted immigration. Okay, next. Okay, my question is now, prior to World War II, how many immigrants were permitted in the U.S., and what were some of the key events that contributed to this wave of immigration? Next slide. This slide comes from information I got from Harvard University. It shows in the period of 1831 to 1940, there were 38 million immigrants to the United States. It peaked in the first decade of the 20th century with almost 8.8 million people arriving. Over the next decade, it dropped by 3 million, ostensibly because of World War I, made it difficult to travel. And then it never regained its pre-World War I peak. And surprisingly, in the 1930s, only 500,000 people were allowed in the United States, and I'm going to talk more about that. Okay, next slide. This is a map that I got from the Holocaust Museum. It gives you an idea of all the Jews that managed to leave Germany between 1933 and 1940, where they went. 90,000 went to the United States, and almost an identical number went to Central and South America. About 60,000 managed to make their way to Palestine, despite the protests from the British. About 15,000 to 18,000 Jews managed to make their way to Shanghai, China, of all places. And more than 10,000 settled in other countries around the world. Okay, next. Here are some of the reasons why they came to the United States. In the 1840s, crop failures, social turbulence, political unrest, the Irish potato famine. In the late 1840s, the discovery of gold in California resulted in huge immigration from China. In the 1860s, Congress passed the Homestead Act, which provided free plots of land for people who were willing to settle on it and live there for at least 5 years. So immigrants who came from overpopulated countries in Europe took advantage of the Homestead Act. In the 1880s, 1 million Germans arrived during the peak of their immigration. From 1881 to 1920, 2 million European Jews immigrated to the U.S. Many left because of religious persecution. And as I mentioned earlier, in 1882, Ellis Island opened. Okay, next slide. What barriers were imposed on aliens wishing to immigrate to the United States? Go on, next. Here are some of the things that happened. Because of the wave of Chinese immigration, the government passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which severely limited their immigration to the U.S. The Immigration Act of 1882, for the first time, identified or named categories of immigrants who would be ineligible for citizenship. People deemed to be lunatics, people who may be likely to become public charges. In other words, that our government would have to support them. In 1891, more classes of ineligible immigrants were added, including people suffering from contagious diseases, people convicted of certain crimes, and polygamists. In 1901, following the assassination of President McKinley, Congress enacted the Anarchist Exclusion Act, which prohibited the entry into the U.S. of people judged to be anarchists and political extremists. In 1921, the government went significantly further in reducing immigration. They passed the Emergency Quota Act to determine how many people would be allowed to immigrate from each country. They looked at the 1910 census and they multiplied that figure by 3%. And then 3 years later, they went even further. They used the 1890 census and said, we'll only allow 2% of the number of people who were here in 1890 to immigrate each year. So you can see substantial decrease, like what you saw on that slide, showing how little immigration was in the 1930s. In 1939, with two people in Congress, and we'll talk about this, Robert Wagner and I'm trying to remember the woman's name, Rogers.
Mr. Rogers.
Not Mr. Rogers. Tried to pass a bill that would have allowed 20,000 German Jewish children to enter the United States, but the bill failed because it lacked the support. Next slide. Oh wait, do you have the one about the Immigration Act? Okay, the Johnson-Reed Act were the names of the sponsors. This bill passed with almost unanimous support. There were only 6 votes against it. And here's a quotation from one who supported the bill. His name was Ellison Durant Smith. He's from South Carolina. He said, I think that we have sufficient stock in America now for us to shut the door, Americanize what we have, and save the resources of America for the natural increase of our population. I think we now have sufficient population in our country for us to shut the door and breed up a pure, unadulterated American citizenship. In other words, they no longer trusted foreigners. Okay. Again, the Wagner-Rogers bill, here are the sponsors. The woman's name is Edith Norris Rogers. Both of them well-known, well-respected. Robert Wagner was very much involved in the passage of the New Deal, the Social Security Act, and the National Labor Relations Act, which regulated collective bargaining between employers and unions, while Edith Norris Rogers was a sponsor of the GI Bill and legislation that created the Women's Army Auxiliary and the Women's Auxiliary. Both of them felt very passionate about helping the Jews in Germany and were hoping to loosen the restrictions. But as I mentioned earlier, they could not get the support, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt would not support the bill, and it went down to defeat. Next. Okay, what were some of the events on the national and international scene that had a direct impact on Jewish immigration? The first was called the Evian Conference, which took place in France in July 1938. At the request of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that convened in Evian-les-Bains, France. There were 32 nations who were there. While there was a lot of sympathy and support for the Jews of Nazi Germany, very few offers were made for refuge for people. The most generous offer came from the Dominican Republic that said that they were willing to admit up to 100,000 immigrants, but only about 800 people actually took advantage of their offer for reasons that are unknown. The British did not even want Palestine mentioned at all during the agenda of the meeting. And the only other tangible thing that was done was the creation of an intergovernmental committee on refugees, which was established to discuss with each nation what opportunities there were for German Jewish immigrants. And unfortunately, it lacked the support, it lacked the money, and so it fell into inaction. Two notable quotations were made about this conference, one coming from Chaim Weizmann, who actually attended. He said, "The world seemed to be divided into two parts, those places where the Jews could not live and those where they could not enter." 41 years later, Walter Mondale said, "If each nation at Evian had agreed on that day to take in 17,000 Jews at once, every Jew in the Reich could have been saved." Next. Anybody familiar with the ship, the SS St. Louis? Yes. In May of 1939, this ship with 937 German Jews sailed from Hamburg to Havana. They had tourist visas, and unknown to them that along the way, before the ship arrived in Havana, the president revoked their tourist visas. The exact reasons are not known. There's speculation that the Nazis may have contacted him and persuaded him not to let the Jews in. There was also the revelation that 29 of those German Jews had obtained permits to seek asylum, and they were allowed to get off the ship, but nobody else could. They were ordered to leave the harbor. They headed north to Miami, where they were intercepted by a Coast Guard ship. They were told that they were not welcome. They turned around, they headed back to Havana one more time in an effort to try to persuade the government to change its mind, and then they headed back towards Europe to Antwerp. It is my understanding that they also contacted the Canadian government and asked if they could disembark in Halifax, and the government refused. When they got back to Europe, England agreed to take 288 of those passengers. The remainder were allowed to stay in France, Belgium, and Netherlands. And of the 620 who stayed on the continent, about nearly half of them died in the Holocaust. Okay, now switch. The next thing I want to talk about was called the Kindertransport. Because of the appeals to the British government by Jewish organizations, the British agreed to allow children, unaccompanied by adults, to come to England and stay there during the war. Now earlier I mentioned that Dave Wynn went, but Dave was not part of the Kindertransport because he was accompanied by his parents. And with the help of trains and boats, these 10,000 children arrived. They started shortly after Kristallnacht in November 1938, and the last transport went out shortly after the war broke out in September of 1939. Most of those children lost their parents, and very few of them went back to Germany. Okay, next. Okay, now I'm going to talk about a very shameful event. I don't know how many people are familiar with this book called None is Too Many. It was written by two authors, Irving Abella and Harold Troper. It was released in the early 80s, and it documents a pattern of anti-Semitism by the Canadian government. And the Canadian government allowed very few Jews to enter, despite pleas from thousands. And it was because of the sentiment of the Immigration Bureau, all the way up to the Prime Minister, Mackenzie King, did not like Jews, did not want them in their country. Here are a couple quotations. One by Frederick Charles Blair, who is the director of the immigration branch. He said, "It is a well-known fact that Jews make any kind of promise to get the door open, but never cease their agitation until they get in the whole lot." Or over in Europe, the chief immigration officer, William Little, said, "Jews cannot be treated as a nation or a religious group, but only as a race. The interest of Canada is to prevent Jewish people from crossing to Canada." Even after the war, when there were Jews at displacement camps, organizations, including the Canadian Jewish Congress, pleaded with the government to allow skilled workers to enter the country to help fill the slots that were desperately needed as their industries grew. In particular, in the furrier industry and in the needlecraft for, seamstresses, they were hoping that the Canadian government would allow thousands to enter, but the government placed severe quotas on who they would allow, and they said no more than 50% of the people we allow in would be Jewish. Now, when I ordered this book on Amazon.com back in January, I looked at the reviews from all the people who commented about the book. There were 7 people who commented. 5 of them had very positive remarks. 2 were very negative, and one of the 2 was just outrageous. That person who posted under an anonymous name says, the quote, "None is too many," is attributed to an anonymous immigration agent, supposedly uttered over 70 years ago. That's pretty convenient. If you manufacture the premise, you can pretty much proceed in any direction you like, taking a swipe at Canada, whose citizens sacrificed much to put Hitler out of business, is downright ungrateful and more than a tad disingenuous. To call this a work of history is a very long stretch. Moreover, this book minimizes a couple other relatively minor historical events that the reviewers may have heard of, namely the Great Depression and World War II. Yeah, right. By treatment of Palestinians and land-grabbing tactics, Israel is making Judaism the new fascism. This book is a bitter work of fiction, alienating friends like Canada, and is a bad idea. Well, I rebuked this person for his comments, and we went back and forth and argued the points, and I finally pointed out to him the fallacies of his argument. First, the strict immigration laws went into effect long before the Depression and were still in effect long after the war was over. In fact, the Immigration Act of 1924, enacted in the U.S., was not repealed until 1965. And as far as the war itself, that didn't prevent people from seeking safe places. Thousands of Jews managed to get to neutral countries like Spain, Portugal, Sweden, and Switzerland. And even in early 1940, the Vichy government in France offered Canada the opportunity to take some of the Jews off their hands, and Canada refused. Finally, I told this individual I was going to write a biography on the prophet Moses called None is Too Many, which tells a story about how when Pharaoh was asked one of his advisors how many Israelites should be allowed to leave, the answer was none is too many. Next slide. 1,000 Children is an organization founded in 2002 here in the United States. I was hoping to get the president, Henry Frankel, to attend today, but unfortunately he was unable to make it. This organization has been researching and documenting all of the Jewish children, refugee children who came to the United States during the war unaccompanied by their parents. The number was originally estimated to be 1,000. Then the estimate was raised to 1,200 and is still continuing to grow as they find more and more information in archives. Now, these children came during the period of 1934 to 1945 and were anywhere from 14 months of age up until age 16. And they were placed with foster families and schools and facilities in the U.S. during their stay. It's interesting to note that 1.5 million Jewish children died in the Holocaust. Only 10,000 were saved through the efforts of the British, and maybe about 1,200 to 1,400 through the U.S., and hundreds or perhaps thousands who managed to hide from the Nazis during the war. So that's a very, very small percentage. Okay, next slide. There was a book that was published in 1990 called Unfulfilled Promise. I managed to get a copy on this on Amazon.com. It was not easy to find because the book is out of print and the publisher is out of business. This is a quotation that was made by Henry Frankel, the president of the 1,000 Children. And he says the book concerns itself with organizations involved in rescuing German Jewish refugee children. How were these organizations started? What problems did they encounter? And what were their successes and failures? The circumstances were unique since these children were under the care of American families while they still had parents living in Germany, many of whom could not escape the Holocaust. The number rescued was small, about 1,000, but it was the largest import of children in the United States experienced till then and broke the precedent for later child rescue efforts. It is a gripping story. Okay, next. Okay. In the book, I managed to find some of the requirements in order for children to be permitted to immigrate to the United States. Besides the age restriction, they had to be physically and mentally healthy, come from normal homes, be eligible for immigration within the regular German quota. And I talked about that earlier when I said the Immigration Act of 1924 determined how many citizens could come from Germany. Special consideration was given to children whose safety was in danger, children with relatives in the United States, and families with affidavits insufficient for the entire family. Okay, now let's put the pieces of the puzzle together. Here's a chronology of events that took place. Sad to say that my mother-in-law, Frida, passed away in 1992 after a lengthy illness, and it was after her death that her daughter, Sherry, and her son, Robbie, went through all her belongings and found some documents while sorting through her personal belongings. In 1993, I started doing my research. I went to the National Archives in New York City and went through ship arrival records on microfilm. Then I put the project on hold and resumed again in 2005, and my father assisted me. I had learned about an organization called the German Jewish Children's Aid and learned that all of their records were stored in microfilm at the YIVO Institute in Lower Manhattan. My father took the information that we found. He went back to Wayne State University's historical library in the hopes of finding some documents about what happened after the children arrived in the Detroit area. And from 2009 to the present, I've been doing research on the internet, and here's a list of some of the sources. Okay, next. Is this a list of documents?
Yes.
Okay, it's hard to see from this angle. We found her passport, which was issued in December 1939. We found a boat ticket for a ship that she boarded in Genoa, Italy. It was called the Conte di Savoia. We found her certificate of naturalization, her naturalization application, certificate of adoption. She was adopted by a family in 1949, and 5 years later, she was married. Okay, let's take a look at the first, her passport. Interestingly, it has a French expression below the word Fremdenpass. Sherry, can you read that?
What? He went too far.
Oh, Dave, back. Below the word Fremdenpass.
Passport, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This was a special passport. It was not intended to be issued to German citizens. It was intended to be issued to people who were no longer going to be German citizens. Interestingly, the signature on there that says Fritzchen Sarah Schwartz, it really piqued my interest. I said to my wife, I didn't know that your mother had a middle name, and she said she doesn't. But David, the older brother, knew that there was a Nazi law that said that all German Jewish girls had to adopt the middle name Sarah, and all the boys had to adopt the middle name Israel. Okay.
That was for the passport, so they could distinguish which was Jewish.
Exactly. Okay. Next slide. Here's a picture of freedom. There's a description that was written in German. Believe it or not, the mother filled this in, and she said that she was blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and small stature, round face. The reason why the mother did that was, again, to try to fool the Germans if ever they looked at the passport, but it's obvious she doesn't have blonde hair. In fact, her eyes were hazel. Next page. In the upper left-hand corner, you might get the word Ausland, which means foreign countries, as opposed to Deutschland, which was Germany. Again, the purpose was to indicate that this passport was not valid in Germany. It was valid anywhere else. They really wanted to get rid of the people then. It wasn't until about October and November of 1941 that Heinrich Himmler issued a directive that slammed the door shut on immigration, and from that point on the decision was made to deport Jews to concentration camps. They were very fortunate to get out. Next. This is her boat ticket for the Conte di Savoia, which sailed from Genoa, Italy on January 23rd, 1940. It arrived in New York Harbor February 1st. Next. Here's a picture of what that ship actually looked like. It was built in 1931. Its maiden voyage it was in 1932 from Naples to New York. It nearly ended in tragedy when a valve ruptured in one of the lower compartments and blew a hole in the hull. The crew managed to patch the hole, and later the ship was repaired and was put back in service. It was scuttled by the Germans when they retreated from Italy in 1943. They set this ship on fire so that it couldn't be captured by the Allies. But it sank in shallow water and was raised by the Italians after the war, but then the decision was made not to repair it, and it was scrapped. Next. And this is Frida's certificate of naturalization. Next. Okay, now I'm going to tell you a little bit about my search for other documents and information. Here are some of the books that I read. I already told you about The Unfulfilled Promise, and number 3, None is Too Many. A couple other books that I read were Echoes of Detroit's Jewish Communities. I did manage to find a little story about another boy who emigrated from Germany, also through the help of the German Jewish Children's Aid, and his story was in that book. And The Minsk Ghetto Soviet Jewish Partisans Against the Nazis, written by Hirsch Smolar, who escaped from the ghetto and joined the partisans and fought the Nazis. And I'll have more to say about that later. Next slide. Here are some of the collections that I went to. I've already mentioned National Archives and the Evo Institute in Wayne State and the Holocaust Museum. I'm going to talk more about the Shoah Foundation, which was a project that I believe Steven Spielberg had created. And it was a collaboration where they put together taped videos of survivors. Their library is very extensive. There are almost 50,000 survivors who agreed to be videotaped to tell their story. And then there were some websites that were very helpful, including Wikipedia, Yad Vashem, and Ancestry.com. Next. In 1993, research was so primitive, by today's standards, that if you went into the archives, they handed you a piece of paper, and if you look on the right-hand side, I had to write out the family's name, I had to cross out the vowels, and I had to cross out any consonants that didn't have a numerical value according to the rules that you see above. And I handed back the paper with S262. They handed me some microfilm, which I then had to put in that machine that you see over on the left. I knew how to use that because I've been using it in high school and in college. And I had to turn the crank slowly until I found the right slide. Next. And this is what I found. I found a record of their arrival. It gives the names. It gives the name of the ship, Conte di Savoia, the arrival date, their ages. Harold was about 9 years old. Frida was about to turn 6, and Harold was 3. Okay, next.
It said 4.
Okay, well, they may have rounded it. Okay, another thing that I found in another reel that was given to me was a list of the ships that arrived in the harbor on February 1st, 1940. Conte di Savoia was listed first. I don't know why. I don't think the size had anything to do with it. Next. Then what I found on microfilm was the ship's manifest, and because the pages were so big, they had to split them in half. I actually obtained these recently on Ancestry.com. They're a much better quality than what I got with the microfilm viewer that I used in 1993. I looked at the columns at the top. I penciled in on a notepad what information was being recorded in each of those columns. And then I scanned down the page, next slide, and down near the bottom I found the names of the 3 children. You can see them, Harold, Frida, and Fritchen, and David. Okay, next. Now, this is just a summation of some of the information that was being asked in the ship's manifest. I'll just quickly mention that over on the right-hand side, after you record the basic information shown on the left, that's where you start answering important questions. First, they wanted to know who paid for the voyage. Under American immigration laws, the family had to buy the ticket. They were not allowed to get the money from anybody else. They want to know, have you ever been in the U.S.? Are you joining a relative or friend? Your purpose if your trip? Have you ever been in prison or institutionalized? Remember I talked about the categories of immigrants who would not be eligible for citizenship? This is one of them. So are the next 2. Are you a polygamist or are you an anarchist? Oh, and have you ever been arrested or deported? And most importantly, they wanted to know the person's mental or physical health. When these people arrived at Ellis Island, they had a brief physical exam, and they were looking for any signs of contagious disease. If they found them, the person was put back on a ship and sent back to their country. Fortunately, all 3 children were in good health. Next slide, Fritchen's information. This will give it to you very quickly. I just mentioned that Stuttgart, Germany is where they got their visa. The closest living relative was the mother, Adele. The final destination was in New York City. I have no idea what this address was. I can only guess it may have been the German Jewish Children's Aid or some other refugee organization that was going to help get them acclimated and settled in their final location. And then it clearly said that she intends to stay permanently and be a U.S. citizen. Okay, next slide. Now, what organizations and persons were instrumental in helping the Schwartz children enter the U.S.? Next slide. Here are 3 of them that I found through the documentation in the archives. The first, the German Jewish Children's Aid, which I later learned is defunct. It no longer exists. Pretty much everything that they did has been taken over by an organization you may be familiar with, HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. And HIAS was the organization that helped put all these records into archives. This next one, which I cannot read the German, but I know my daughter can, is the Department of Children's Immigration of the Reich Association of Jews in Germany. And the last, the National Council of Jewish Women, I believe, with the help of the Jewish Federation of Detroit, were the 2 that helped locate the families where the children moved to. Next. I'm going to move a little quicker now. Cecilia Rozovsky, I learned, was a very important person on all immigration issues, and this is a very impressive list. In fact, this is not everything. She did a lot more than this. And the German Jewish Children's Aid and National Council of Jewish Women were two of the organizations that she worked for. I later learned that in the 1960s, she visited the Jewish community in Cuba, and she met some of the people who were allowed to disembark from the SS St. Louis. Next slide. Two other names came up. One of them I was able to find information. Katie Rosenheim, who's the head of the Department of Children's Immigration in Nazi Germany. She was forced to resign from her position at the end of 1940. She fled Germany, made her way to the United States via Cuba, and she is credited with saving the lives of over 7,200 German Jewish children. The other, Lottie Marcuse, we have very little information who this person was. We've seen her name in numerous letters. We don't know her when she was born and died. We know where she was educated. It was at the Prussian Ministry of the Interior in Germany. She came to the U.S. in 1921 and served as a placement director for the German Jewish Children's Aid. Okay, next. Okay, now I'll talk about the information that I found in the archives, and we'll move quickly through these. Next. We found a list of passengers by date and ship names with dates of arrival. We found correspondence between the two organizations that I mentioned earlier and correspondence from the Jewish Federation. Next. Here's something I found in the Evo Institute. Look at the arrow up there and you'll see the names of the children. This is a list of all the German Jewish refugee children that were aboard that ship that arrived on February 1st. It also mentions the name of their escort, a Dr. Carfiel. I have not been able to find out anything about him. Okay, next. This is an excerpt of a letter written in German. The arrow points to the children's names. It confirms that they've received the affidavits for the Schwartz children and other children who are going to be on that ship. Next. And this is another letter that's also written in German. And in the letter they say, allow us to remind you that the 8 tickets for the Conte di Savoia, which you had promised in your telegram from December 11th, according to the Italian representative, have not yet been received. Next. This one simply says that they finally received Fritschen's paperwork, but this was in April 1940 after she had already arrived. And this one is a bit distressing. It was an undated letter from Lottie Marcuse to Katie Rosenheim. She says at the beginning, the Schwartz children, apparently this is another case in which the parents assume that the relatives here would just take these youngsters in and that's that. In the last sentence she said, I hope this will work out too, but do tell me why you made us take all 3 children. Very surprising comment from the person who did the placements of children in the U.S. And finally, by the arrow indicated this is a report from the Jewish Welfare Federation. They did not specifically identify the children by name who they helped place. But the last 3 sets of initials up there, DS, FS, and HS, are the Schwartz children. Back then, to try to lessen any suspicions from anti-Semitic people, they did everything very quietly, and that even included their correspondence. Next. Now, what happened to the children after they arrived in America? Next. Okay. Fritschen became Frida. She went to live with a couple, Armin and Celia Ferenz. In 1949, when it was clear that the parents did not survive, they adopted her. And as I mentioned earlier, she became a citizen in 1951. Here are some early photos of Frida. The one in the upper left-hand corner was a Mother's Day card that we found, dated May of 1940, that was in Frida's papers. We don't know why it was never mailed to her real mother, Adele, in Germany. Next. In 1954, Frida married Edward Greenfield. Next. Edward sadly passed away in 1966 after a lengthy illness. He died of ileitis, which he had contracted while he was served in the Korean War. As a civilian, he was an automotive engineer for Ford Motor Company. Next. Here are the children with Frida. In December 1978, Robbie, the younger child, had his bar mitzvah. Over on the right, you can see Frida's with her grandchildren, Alyssa and Jillian. This picture, I believe, was taken in June 1992 at Peddler's Village, just 5 months before Frida passed away. Next. In 2001, the younger child, Robbie, married Julie Colt. And about 4 years later, Julie gave birth to twins, Freddie and James Greenfield. Freddie was named after Frida. In fact, Freddie was one of Frida's nicknames that I believe was given to her by, was it her father-in-law?
Freddie was on the Greenfield side.
Okay.
Kind of my grandmother.
Okay. Next, David went to live with a couple, Max and Frida Solomon. David served 2 years in the Marine Corps. After he was released from the Marine Corps, he married Harriet Frank. He worked for a couple newspapers in Detroit, and because of a merger and a bankruptcy of one of the papers, he lost his home. So he and Harriet moved to Denver in December 1962, where he was hired by the Denver Post, which he worked for about 33 years. He retired in 1996. He moved to Boynton Beach, Florida in 2001. Harriet and David have 2 children, Andrea, Michael, and 3 grandchildren. Next.
You didn't say who the Solomon was.
Oh, the Solomon, Frida Solomon was sister to Armin Ferenz, who is the foster father of Frida and later became her stepfather.
No, adopted.
Adopted, thank you. Harold also lived with the Solomons. He enlisted in the U.S. Army, served for 2 years. He was stationed in Germany. After he was discharged, he became a U.S. citizen. He is a widower, has 1 child, Amy, 2 grandchildren, and a great-grandson. He moved to California in 1969 and later to Arizona, where he now lives in Chandler. He worked for the Arizona Republic newspaper before he retired, but he works there about 1 day a week. Next. This is a little bit of a reunion of the Schwartzes. This took place in September 2001. Okay, the wedding of Robbie and Julie Greenfield. That's David. David's wife Harriet. This is Harold. That's his wife Wanda. David's children are Michael and Andrea, and David's son-in-law is John Leto. And my family, of course, right there. Okay, next. Okay, so what happened to the parents? Next. While doing a search on the parents on Yad Vashem, I learned that they died in the Minsk ghetto. At that time, Minsk was in a country called Belarusia, which is just east of Poland. Today, it's known as Belarus. Sometime around November 10th or 11th of 1941, they were deported to the ghetto. Now, we learned from other information and sources that, including the book that I mentioned earlier about the Minsk ghetto, that a trainload of Jews arrived from Hamburg, Germany to the ghetto sometime around that time period. It is my guess that the Schwartzes, the parents, may have gone to Hamburg in the hopes of boarding the ship to leave the country and were deported by the Nazis. Other sources tell me that They were declared dead on May 8th, 1945, after the war was over, that there was no exact date of death. I do know from the book, The Men's Ghetto, that Jews were rounded up in large numbers, were taken out to a cemetery, and were executed by firing squad, and that may have been where they passed away. Next, here are some photos that I recently received from Harold, the younger son. The one on the right shows Fritchen with the mother Adele, and the left is the parents. Next, okay, recently I learned that David was interviewed by the Shoah Foundation in April of 1996. Here he's holding up a postcard that he received from his parents. I watched the interview and I learned some rather interesting things. First, David had indicated his father was a successful businessman selling used rags. Who bought them? I don't know. But the family was well-to-do until the Nazis forced Muttel to shut down his company around 1936 and report to a work camp. The family could no longer afford to maintain their lifestyle because the only compensation that Muttel received from the government was ration coupons. Muttel was a Polish officer in World War I. Muttel and Adele were first cousins, and they were born in Lodz, Poland. David was kicked out of school when the Nazis decreed Jews could no longer attend school, and because of the Nazi laws, he wasn't allowed to read books or play in parks, and he was treated very harshly by Gentile children. Here's another surprising thing. David was shot in the leg by an SS officer when he accidentally hit the officer with a snowball. Fortunately, it was only a grazed wound on his leg, and when he came home, his mother bandaged it. Muttel was not allowed to travel. At times, he was interred in a work camp. Adele was not prohibited from traveling because the Nazis were more concerned about the whereabouts of men than women. Hence, that was one thing that made it possible for her to travel and leave the country. David thinks an underground organization helped his family travel by train to Italy. At times they had to hide on the train whenever they saw Nazi soldiers because they were afraid of being arrested. When David and the kids were on the Conte di Savoia, they stayed in the same cabin, but nobody looked after them until they reached Ellis Island. After being processed and taken to New York, they were greeted by a cousin who had arrived in the U.S. a few years earlier. And the Jewish Federation of Detroit made the travel arrangements and selected the families where the kids would live. David went back to Germany about 50 years after he left. He credits the decision to go back to his daughter Andrea, who persuaded him to make the trip. He tried to find his old house in Wuppertal, but he was unable to do so. The area had just changed dramatically, has had the streets. Okay, here are some of the photos that David showed during the interview. I managed to get screen captures of those pictures. Do we have time to show the video clip?
I don't know how much you figured it out.
Okay. All right. Last slide. Okay, any questions?
Is that book still in print, the one that none is too many, starts to teach the Holocaust at the JCC?
Yes, None is Too Many can be ordered on Amazon.com. You can get it for less than the face price. Just have to do a search on the book section. Excuse me?
I said I knew nothing about the canon.
It is a fascinating subject. I encourage everybody to read about it. Yes, Ed?
No questions, just a comment. I'm really impressed with the amount of time and energy you put into this. I'm very impressed. Very nice.
Thank you. Yes?
Another very good book on the subject is called The Abandonment of the Jews, written about 10 years ago. Quite a thick book about the whole...
Is it still available?
Yes.
For sale? Abandonment of the Jews? Do you know the author?
I can't think of the gentleman's name. It got a lot of publicity when it was written, so it was a fairly well-known book.
Okay.
And the relationship between David Schwartz and David Schwartz?
No relationship. In fact, there's another David Schwartz here in Cherry Hill who's also not related to us. I want to conclude by saying that, again, the odds of any Jewish European Jewish child survive in the war was very slim. And I'm very grateful for all the organizations that made it possible for Frida and her brothers to come here to the United States. Had circumstances been different, I'm absolutely certain they would not have made the trip, they would not have survived, and that my wife and daughters would not exist today. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank Alan. This was extremely informative. You could see that there was a lot of detail that went into it, a lot of time. And on behalf of the men's club, we'll give Dave a second here to get.
He didn't realize that we had to take the picture.
We're doing URCB.
He was very comfortable, I can tell.
He was.
Thank you.
Very good.
We'll have them sign it. Okay. It's kind of hard in New York.
Yes?
Somebody mentioned something. Next meeting. Oh, next meeting. Our next meeting is going to be at the Voorhees Community Center.
June 26th.
Which would be June 26th? Thank you. This will be, if you don't remember, this is the one that's next to the new hospital. I don't know whether or not they put the new hospital in for our sake or.
Yeah, the food's not that bad.
The old place. The old place. The old place, yes. Other than that, any...
Anyone else want to sign the sign-up sheets for the JCRC meeting with the River Shark? If you didn't get it,
Gentlemen.
Very good. I'd like, once again, thank you all.
Can I make a quick announcement?
You can make a slow announcement.
No, don't say slow, not to.
If you remember, one of the JCRC events was a group of Christian evangelists who were pro-Israel, and as a result of that, I got a book out of it. It's a very interesting book to read. It defies the belief that they only want to support Israel because they're in a hurry to get the second coming of Jesus. But I just want to know if anybody would care to read it. It's available all over here if you want to take it and read it. It's a very interesting book.
Thank you. Our speaker for the next meeting again is David Portnow. If you don't know who David Portnow is, he's the editor of The Voice. So it should prove to be another interesting meeting. And, excuse me? Does he have a complaint?
Portnoy's complaint.
Portnoy's complaint. Very good. Very.
It's actually not Portnoy, it's Portnow.
It's Portnow anyway, but that's close enough. Anyway, thank you very much for coming, and we are adjourning the meeting.